Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the contents of this package, which are very similar to the things you see right next to it, which are Sega Genesis controllers by RetroBit. Before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as go into the social media stuff in the description, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc. I appreciate the support and follows on all those places, as well as Spreadshirt and other stuff like that. Keep the channel running. Thank you very much. In case it isn't obvious, I'm a big Sega guy. Like, you know, I was a big Sega kid. I've got this hoodie that Sega themselves gave me. In the past, RetroBit has actually sent me this controller before that I did an entire video on. When I was a child, and this is actually a recent rediscovery, my first, like, real system, other than the Atari 2600 that was kind of a hand-me-down from my mother, the first one I could call my own was the Sega Genesis Model 2. Recently, well, last year there was a big house fire in the house I grew up in, and I thought they were destroyed, but very recently I was able to find and unearth and save a couple photos of me as a child with the Sega Genesis, and you can see one there of me holding the console, super excited. Which, by the way, since I now wander around with the Sega Pluto doing this exact same thing, taking photos of it in front of stuff, you can tell I haven't changed a whole lot. But the other thing, of course, that I got back then was a classic bean-shaped Sega Genesis 3-button controller, an additional controller on top of the one that it came with. So it's kind of fitting to come full circle here and actually, once again, talk about the Sega Genesis 3-button bean controller, which now no longer is limited to 3 buttons. Before we talk about that, though, specifically, I do want to say, yes, RetroBit made these, and in the past they have sent me stuff like this one. They actually had nothing to do with this. They did not send this to me. Sega, who has sent me stuff in the past, including this hoodie, which they gave me themselves. This is actually a Sega Europe employee hoodie. They had nothing to do with this. They didn't give this to me. Where I actually got these is from a viewer of mine, a super fan, I would say, named Lodmot, who within the canon of my Discord, which you should totally join if you're not there, it's completely free. It's just a bunch of nerds all hanging out, and we develop lore for each other. It's a whole thing. Anyway, you're welcome anytime. Within the server lore, he's the wealthiest known human being in the universe, and so he's constantly just spending money to send us stuff. Yeah, that's how he rolls. So he actually previously had sent me this. This is the Big 6 Sega Genesis controller, the wired edition. Now, an elevator pitch of what this is. So as I mentioned before, when the Sega Genesis came out, Sega released it like this. This is the classic bean shape with the 3 buttons, the start button, the D-pad. Pretty simple controller. Worked really well. The vast majority of the Sega Genesis games are compatible with it. Its lifespan, that was what it was really known for. However, as the Genesis moved on with the advent of things like the Sega CD, to a lesser extent the 32X, but more so the popularity of fighting games, Street Fighter II in particular, Sega recognized they had to kind of update the controller and add more buttons to be more competitive with what Nintendo was able to offer, because they had 4 face buttons as well as triggers, and this was just limited to the 3. They also had a select button, which this didn't have, so it was kind of harder for developers to work with. So Sega actually redesigned it into this basic shape. Now, this is obviously not the original, as I mentioned before, but since these are all licensed by Sega, they just use the same molding, and so essentially this was the one they came up with, which was a smaller, more ergonomic controller, I would say, the 6-button controller, as it's commonly referred to. However, there's always been this debate about which controller is better. You know, which one do people like more? And I was always kind of in the camp of, like, I was just so in love with the traditional controller. Granted, as you saw in the photo, like, there might be reasons for that that are deep-seated into childhood nostalgia, but I do genuinely like this controller. But obviously it does have limitations, because if you run into one of these games on the Genesis itself or Mega Drive, as well as the Sega CD or 32X that actually needs or can enhance from those additional buttons, you're kind of out of luck. Until now. It took until 2023 for this error, if you will, to be corrected, but RetroBit finally did it. So that's where these come in. These are 6-button controllers that use the original face, shape, mold, what have you, of the Bean controller. So this one in particular is just a wired one. There's really nothing else special about it. You know, as you know, RetroBit has been re-releasing these things. They've made a couple of changes, that being the most obvious part is the fact that it's got the 6 buttons, but also they did other things like make the controller like wire longer, you know, like just so you, because, you know, we like to sit a little further back now, we're not all kids anymore, etc. So they, yeah, that's really the purpose of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at it real quick. This one should be, as far as compatibility goes, should be incredibly basic. It really, well, Lodmot sent this one in too, by the way. He sent this one and this one, which we're going to open up in a moment, but we'll take a look at this one first. But yeah, so they made this controller should be compatible with like not only every iteration of the Genesis where an original controller would have been, or a Mega Drive where every controller should have been. It'll also be compatible with things like, say, the Master System, where again, if an original Sega Genesis controller worked on it, this one should work on it. There really shouldn't be any surprises under the hood. A little thank you from RetroBit for the purchase, which Lodmot did, and then there's the controller itself, which is again pretty simple. So like I said, the controller length is a little bit longer. It does still say Sega all over it there. The face buttons are a little different. Well, obviously the buttons are different. It's more, what I was trying to say is the screen printing, where this one says Sega Genesis on the original. They kind of redesigned that for some reason. I'm not totally sure why. They moved it up. That part I get because they adjusted the buttons, but why they made it, they kind of mirror flipped it a little bit as far as the color coding, I guess. I'm not entirely certain why. The most obvious change, though, aside from the 6 buttons themselves, is the start button. On the original, it was like this big gray button clearly detached from the 3 face buttons, and it kind of had its own space. In this one, they've just built it into the panel to keep it in relatively the same spot. It's a smaller button. It doesn't really pop out. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know if it should have maybe been put to the center or it should have been put a little higher. I don't know. I'm going to have to play with it, obviously, for a while to really draw a conclusion on that. But that's cool. It also has an additional mode button, which the Model 2 or the 6 button originally had for the games that required that. But aside from that, I mean, Sega Genesis controller. Feels nice. If you've held the 3 button controller, it's very similar. The D-pad is definitely redesigned. It's closer to the D-pad of the original 6 button controller, which again also makes sense. Really, this is the 6 button controller quite literally, just in the form factor of the Beam controller. So that makes a lot of sense. So let's open up the other one here. Which again, thank you to Lodmot for spending part of your vast fortune to make this happen. That was very nice of you. You did not have to do that. And I mean that goes to anybody, by the way, like, in all jokes aside, like, you don't have to send me stuff. I appreciate it. It's cool. I love talking about it, but you don't have to. If, however, you are interested in getting one of these, again, Lodmot doesn't sell them, you know, but I will say that I believe Castlemania Games, my buddy Ryan, he does sell these, so if you are interested, I'll put a link in the description for that. Inside, I probably also should have mentioned that Lodmot's a little weird, so he also includes random stuff. Here we go. He randomly sent me, it looks like an 8-track called Boston. I told you Lodmot's weird. Lodmot's super into 8-track because he's wealthy enough that he can keep 8-track alive. Best rock band ever. Reminds me of the Sonic for some reason. LOL XD. See back. I was tipsy when I wrote this. Lodmot. And then he drew a picture of Sonic made out of spaghetti or something. I don't know. But yeah, Lodmot drinks a lot too. But no, he's a super nice guy. Thank you for that, and he's very weird. Now we'll put all this to the side. There we go. So this is the wireless version of the exact same controller. This one's a tad more unique. It's much more like this as far as compatibility goes. Like, don't get me wrong, I love having a wired controller. I'm a very classic guy, obviously, and I appreciate that that is a thing. But this does have additional uniqueness that I think is worth discussing. So this one comes with not only a USB dongle, or the console dongle that will make it work on the Genesis, or in this case Master System as well. It will also come with a USB dongle that gives it additional compatibility. Off the top of my head, I know that it'll obviously work on PC, it works on the Steam Deck, it actually works on the Nintendo Switch in the Switch Online mode, like for Genesis games specifically, and there's probably additional compatibilities. Now, the thing is, for our purposes, we're really just going to focus on how it performs on the Genesis. I have actually been using one of these for a while from RetroBit. I use the Saturn one, because we use it for the Sega Pluto prototype when we take it around to places, so that's very nice. Now, when we take the little slide thing off there, they used to come in these like plastic hard cases. This is now like a basically a nice little cardboard box. It's still fine. So we take out the dongle. These are the V2 dongles. So basically, since RetroBit has been making these type of controllers for a while, they've been making other additional changes. They've also changed the pairing dongles. So these very clearly label V2. The reason that matters is if you have an older controller, you can't replace it with a V2 dongle. They're not cross-compatible. You have to have the right one. Where that does have some benefits, though, is cross-compatibility with consoles. If, for example, you have the Saturn V2, which almost sounds like a World War II rocket or something. Well, because it sort of was. Anyway, that's not the point. Saturn rocket, V2 rocket. Anyway, that doesn't matter. If you have this Saturn V2 model of the controller dongle, this controller will actually be cross-compatible with that. So you could, all I'm trying to say is you could actually use this controller on a Sega Saturn. I don't know why you would, because the Saturn controller is, you know, better for use on the Saturn, but anyway, technically it works. But yeah, for our purposes, we probably won't really be using the USB one. However, it should be noted that it does work with the, as you can see over there, the Sega Genesis Mini 1 and 2 are also compatible with this, which is very nice. But again, we're just going to focus on the wireless aspect of using it on an actual Sega Genesis. So yeah, that's interesting. So the wired one has a single mode button on the right. The wireless one has a left and right trigger. It doesn't have the mode button. I'm assuming, and it also has additional buttons at the bottom that this one did not have for home and select. This would no doubt be for Switch cross-compatibility and probably for any other scenario in which you might need it, again, maybe on the Genesis Minis or maybe the Steam Deck or whatever it is. But on the Genesis, those probably won't have a whole lot of functionality. In fact, I would imagine on an actual Genesis, just the right one would act as the mode button. I guess I don't really know that, but that would be my guess. My same stance kind of applies on the start button here. I'm not sure that I like that. But oh, it's starting to try and pair with something. Yeah, see, there's already power in it. That's good. It has a USB-C port for charging, which is nice because I think that's actually the first time a RetroBit controller has had that, but don't quote me on that. Every other one, like this one, uses USB micro, for example. So it's nice they're making that upgrade. So in addition to the controller, the dongles, the instructions, etc., it also comes with a thank you card and then an actual USB-C controller for charging. So what I'm going to do now, because it all seems kind of nice, it's got some weight to it, actually. They look good next to each other, and of course you can compare it to the original. It's much heavier than the original, but again, that's because it's got a battery, and I think a more fair comparison would be these two. And then I'd say that this one has more weight to it, but that's largely because the controller part, or the cable part, is longer. Okay, so I've been using these things for a little while now. It's time for final thoughts. With the plug-in controller, the direct connection, like the wired one, I got nothing really to say. You know, it worked just fine. There was no issues of any kind. It was just, hey, it's the same controller but with 6 buttons, a slightly different location for the start button, and the D-pad being a little different. So I have to admit, it took a little while to kind of get used to it, because you have to understand, as you saw in that photo, I've been playing the Genesis with the 3-button controller for literally decades now. So it took a little muscle memory, I will admit. So I was playing Sonic 2 for a bit, which I know doesn't even use the extra buttons. I mean, I played a bunch of games, but in that game, I memorized like how to do the cheat code, right? Like right at the beginning, so you can activate Supersonic and all that. With this controller, the muscle memory failed, and I like, how do I do that again? You know what I mean? Like I can't tell you the sequence you're supposed to put in. It's just my hand knows it. But with this controller, it didn't know it, at least initially. Then when I did it again with this controller, it did know it. So yeah, it was just one of those things. Took a little getting used to, but that's not a knock against it. It's more like I'm just very conditioned and seasoned to that particular original 3-button controller. So it's just a me thing. But yeah, build quality and all of that, very good. Now, when it comes to the wireless one, kind of the same deal. There really isn't much else to say on it, other than, like I said before, you have to charge it. So when you do that, when you plug it in, it'll be blinking red. When it's fully charged, it'll switch to a solid red light, and then you're good to go. In general, it's always best to charge batteries like that before you actually start using them, just for the longevity of the battery. And then when I went to connect it, usually RetroBit stuff is pretty simple. There's just a simple, like, you press start and it kind of syncs up type of thing. This one I'm not going to say was a problem, because it wasn't, but it technically required an extra step, which was, so I connected the dongle and it starts searching for the controller. And I turn the controller on by pressing start, and it starts searching for the dongle, but they weren't finding each other. And then so I noticed there's a button on the dongle, so I just pressed that, and as soon as I did that, they synced up immediately. That's the closest thing to a negative I really have to say from a technical perspective is, oh, right, remember to press that, that button. Honestly, there really is nothing really much else to say. Like, they did a good job. They built it very well, at least within the Sega Genesis, within context. And that's, again, the way I want to look at it. Again, the muscle memory thing, that's more of a me thing. But, yeah, I think if I had had access to this when I was a little kid, it would have been great. So when it came to the other 6-button games and stuff, you have to keep in mind, there's not a ton of them. I actually didn't know how many there were, so in between here, I actually looked. The list is not that extensive. But to add to that, there are actually Genesis games that are totally incompatible with the 6-button controller. It's not this one's fault. It's actually the original way Sega did it. It's just some games just don't happen to work. You can Google that and find the list yourself if you want. But it worked just fine with those. So Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of a, I wish there were some dramas or drums, hashtag drums, but really there's nothing. The controller works really well. I like it. So it fits a very particular niche. Like, if you're into the 6-button games, of which there are not a ton, and you are that guy who's just like, or that girl who's just like, I need the old bean style, but I need the 6 buttons. Congratulations, a solution now exists, but kind of niche. But that said, pretty cool. If you are in that, or just somebody who likes the idea of this, I'll put a link in the description to, I guess, Castlevania games, even though, again, they had nothing to do with this, and you can check it out there and pick one up if you want. So a huge shout out to Lodmod, again, the richest, wealthiest known person in the history of the universe, per the Discord lore. And if you want to join that Discord or any of the other social media stuff I have, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, I said Discord multiple times, but whatever, it's all there in the description. Thank you very much. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all later.